one of my very supportive members who saw the leap that I was making in moving into this new space left this book on my desk. It's called The Crossroads of Should and Must, and it is by the lovely Elle Luna, who is joining us today. And what I thought was so special about this book is it's not an ordinary book. I could tell from the cover and the paper that this was a book like nothing I'd ever seen. More than a book, it was a piece of art. And I felt right away like I understood this person. I'm like, she's an artist. And I felt like she gets what we're doing here. She is taking art into a different type of expression. And I just, without meeting her, was like, I love this person. she's awesome. So I, on a whim, emailed Elle one day and said, what can we do to get you here at the Hivery? We had a beautiful conversation on a late Friday afternoon. And any of you that were here after I got off the phone with her was like, I just talked to Elle. Like, I was so excited. So I'm thrilled that you're here. Thank you so much for being part of this with us. And I would like to welcome Elle Luna.
I wish that you could just walk around with me everywhere and introduce me like that. That would be awesome. Thank you. Oh my gosh. I'm so revved up after the talk this morning, but I'm not feeling fearless. I'm going to PK, right? Is that the word? So I'm going to PK with you all this morning, and I'm going to share a little bit about what I've been working on. A couple of years ago, I guess like a year and a half, I posted an essay online called The Crossroads of Should and Must, and this was the post. I put it on Twitter, probably like so many of you all. I post things online all the time. You just kind of lob them out there into the digital world, not knowing what is going to quite happen to them. But something happened to this post that had never happened with anything else I had ever shared. Within 2 weeks, it was tweeted to over 5 million people and read by over 250,000 readers. And I sat there looking at these numbers thinking, holy shit. I extended the post into a book, which if you don't have, I brought 2 copies for the Hivery Library. Or if you'd like your own copy, they have them for sale at the depot or online.
And downstairs.
Whoa.
She sends tons of them.
Get out!
She's a super big fan.
Oh, it's like we're on special territory right here. So this is the book, but today I want to go back and share the story of where it all began. It all started with a dream, a recurring dream about a white room. And in this dream, I would walk inside the most unbelievable white room with tall white walls, warehouse windows running the length of one of the walls, and concrete floors. And I would walk into this room in my dreams, and I would sit down on the floor, and I would be filled with the most unbelievable sense of peace. That was it. That was my dream. And one day, I told a friend of mine about this dream, and she said, have you ever thought about looking for your dream in real life? To which I thought, that's totally stupid. And I thought, but that's actually also kind of interesting. How do we get the dreams that we have, right? These unmitigated, choiceless things that come to us when we're sleeping? What's that all about? So I began to contemplate her very absurd question, and I started off on a treasure hunt, thinking, all right, if I'm going to do this, if I'm really going to do this, if I'm going to look for my dreams in real life, where do I start? Where do I even begin? I'll give you a tip. Craigslist. Pro tip. I felt really stupid. I'm not going to lie. I'm like sitting there hovering over the search box like, what am I doing? I'm like so old to be doing this. Not old at all, but that's how I felt. This seemed like something for kids. What am I doing? But I had this feeling, and maybe you felt this about something in your life. I had this unbelievable feeling that whatever I was looking for was looking for me too. And so I just kept searching, and lo and behold, one day I found it. The white room from my dreams was an apartment for rent in San Francisco, and there was an open house the very next day. Why not? I go to the open house, I walk in, I give my rental application, and I get a phone call that the apartment is mine. I move in 2 weeks later, and on my very first night in the white room from my dreams, which is so trippy, right? Like I'm in a room in real life that mimics the room that I already experienced in my dream. How that works, I do not know. And I sat down waiting for that all-encompassing peace to arrive, but I didn't feel it. I actually began to panic. All of the voices came on in my head like, what are you doing? This is so ridiculous. What have you just done? I started feeling very frustrated. I can feel your heartbeat begin to race. All these questions are suddenly coming into your mind. And so I decided to ask the room, why am I here? And the room replied, it's time to paint. Now, I had painted all the time as a little girl. I had painted all through high school. I had painted through college. I went to grad school for art. But somewhere along the way, I just sort of forgot about it. I think I just got busy. I just started doing other things, and I just kept going on with my life. So upon hearing the room tell me that I needed to begin painting, I went to the art supply store the next morning, and I jokingly say I got the band back together again. I collected all the things. You've got something in your life, right? The ballet shoes, right? Or whatever it might be, those things, like the smell of how, the way they feel, exactly which colors you'd pick. Like you just know, it's in you. So I did this thing, and I came back to the white room from my dreams, and I got busy creating my dream in real life. This is the white room. This was the room that I had been dreaming about repeatedly. And what's interesting is that I had been yearning for this space almost despite myself. I almost didn't even know how badly I wanted this space. I like to joke that, in this space, the only rule was that there were no rules. I worked at scales that deliberately freaked me out. This is a photo scrim. And when big started to get easy, I wanted to shake things up. I moved to small. These are 100 self-portraits I created in 100 days. And I started sharing all of this on social media, for better and for worse. And I very quickly learned that if you're ever sharing something that you feel quite vulnerable about, if you have a cute baby or a small, fluffy white dog, just put them in front of that thing. Pro tip, Craigslist, baby. So one day something happened that I never would have anticipated. A bunch of people came over with a huge truck. They took all the paintings off the walls. There was literally one that they had to peel the wall off with the painting. And they took them to a gallery in San Francisco where I had my very first solo exhibition, titled appropriately, Far From Shore. And looking back, all these years later, what I know about that moment was that it was really freaking important. It was a really important moment because there was something there that I needed so badly in my life. And it wasn't an art show. What I needed in my life was space. Not just any kind of space, this space. Blank space, empty space, raw space. A space for me to just exist. To hear my true voice say whatever it needed to say. And the only catch in this whole great, wonderful scenario is that I had a full-time, exhausting job. I was working well over 40 hours a week at a startup called Mailbox. I was the design lead, and our mission was to revolutionize email for the iPhone. And probably like anyone else who's worked at a startup that was like this, there's a joke for a reason that says we sleep under our desks. Now, I'm sure the Hivery is here to make sure that we don't take these practices forward, but such was my life. Around this time, I came across a biography about Picasso by Arianna Huffington. It's awesome. Who knew? She wrote the most monumental biography about Picasso, and in it, she describes exactly, Grace, what you were talking about this morning, about how he combined his work and his life, right? I think that's what we're all kind of figuring out. How did all these things mix together? How do they play? Or at least that's what I was asking at this time. And in it, there's just this great line. I'm gonna quote it, so I'm gonna repeat it to you. She said, the more I looked at Picasso's life and the more I delved into his art, the more the two converged. It's not what an artist does that counts, but what he is, Picasso said. But Picasso's work was so thoroughly autobiographical that what he did was what he was. You guys, I read that sentence again. I highlighted it, I underlined it, I starred it, I tabbed the page. What did that mean for how I might combine my work and my life? It led me to a question. What if who we are and what we do is one and the same? What if our work is so thoroughly autobiographical that we can no longer parse the product from the person? What if it wasn't just about going out there and making art, but transforming my very life into an entire work of art? It was launch day at Mailbox, and we had like 1 million people waiting in a digital queue for our app that we had built before we launched it. And I remember sitting at my desk thinking, oh my God, this is incredible. We've built something, that's going to be available on iPhones all around the world. This is a miracle, if you think about it, that you can build something and then make it downloadable no matter where you are on the planet. That's amazing. I sat there and I thought about all these people, and I just, we were like on CNN and we were in Time magazine, and I finally could tell my parents, this is what I do. They finally got it. They're like, oh, okay, we get it. And I sat there thinking, this is an unmitigated success, to be a part of a team, to build something, to do this. It was incredible. And at the same time, I couldn't help but wonder, what does any of this have to do with my dream of a white room? What I knew I needed in my life was a rest. I was exhausted. But not just a literal rest. I knew I also was interested in cultivating a restful mind, free from all of the busyness and all of the hecticness that came from hockey stick graphs of goal-orientedness and all the meetings, swimming and meetings. And I wanted to be free of all of these trappings that I felt came so acutely along with the corporate world, which admittedly I adored. But I realized were causing a lot of trappings for me and for my life. And it was at this moment that the Crossroads appeared very clearly. I was managing the Twitter account as this looming Crossroads came, and I saw that I had 2 choices in my life. I had 2 roads, and they were both equally appealing, and that's what's hard about a crossroads. If it wasn't hard, it wouldn't be a choice. It'd be so obvious, you just keep going. These 2 options, they were equally appealing, but they were different, and I had to choose. And what I knew is that money could be used to buy great outfits. Love that. Money could be used to buy great dinners, but money could also be used to buy time. And I looked at my finances, and I saw that I had some money saved up, and I thought, what if I just bought myself some time? I called it a sandbox. I said, what if I just stepped away and just gave it a go, to have no goals, no case studies, no right answers, just to go and be for a little while. I thought, oh, that sounds awesome. I would love that. And so I did it, and I quit. What I've learned from this day is that we all arrive at this crossroads over and over again throughout our lives. And every time we arrive between should and must, we get to choose which way our journey is going to go. Every time. I wish it was a one-time, forever thing, but it's not. We have to re-up every time we make a decision, right? So should, what's that all about? Well, should is all of the expectations and obligations that others put on us. And when we live our life in should, or when we follow should, you can feel it. Your muscles constrict, your shoulders get tight, and you also kind of do some of this, right? When we live our life in should, we are essentially choosing to live our life for someone or something other than ourselves. Must is different. Must is who you are. It's what you believe. It's what you know to be true when you are alone with your quietest, truest self. Must is your passions. It's the things that make you look twice. It's something that you just can't get out of your head. Look at your books. Must is probably living in your bookshelf, might be living in your closet. Must is there. There are clues for must. It might be in your music selection. Must is this thing that you can't quite explain. It's undeniable. It just is. And if I've learned one thing from this journey, it is this. choosing must is the greatest thing that we can do with our lives. But if it's so awesome and so great, why don't we choose it every day? It would be so great if we could just do it all the time. But it's more complicated than that. The reason we can't choose it every day is because of should. So I'm going to go into a little bit of psychology, sort of like how social psychology, about how we're raised and how we're brought up. We are essentially brought up in a world of shoulds, and this is a normal and healthy process. For anybody who has a kid, I don't have a kid, but I've probably met some of your kids. Kids are wild. They're totally wild. And kids have to learn how to behave in order to fit in and to function in society, right? So we have to tell them, like, you can't hit, you shouldn't hit, right? You shouldn't bully, you shouldn't, and so as kids we learn how to behave so we can fit into the world. But now, around the age of 12, 13, 14, it becomes important for that child to begin to question the shoulds that they've inherited from their parents, their community, from the culture at large. Now that's the hardest one of all, right? Because it's everywhere. That's a very healthy, normal process. But the trick is, what happens if you skip that part? What happens if you find yourself as an adult still living in a world of shoulds from childhood that you haven't consciously examined, right? Oh my God, it says must in training. This is baby must on the other side of this, I'm just going to call this a shitstorm of shoulds. And what I want to talk to you about today is so fresh, I had to create some notes. One moment. The notes are in purple. I think that's a good sign. So what happens if you find yourself on the other side of all of these shoulds? And I want to raise my hand and I want to say, this happened to me. This happened to me. This is my PK moment. I'm gonna lean out. I'm gonna go. So please hold me as I go. In my late 20s, I became unbelievably sad. I became lost. I felt really confused. And the worst part about feeling all of those things is that I couldn't identify why, right? When we experience things, we want to figure it out, and we want to make them go away as quickly as possible because they hurt. They hurt. And I felt this overwhelming, looming sense in my life that I couldn't put my finger on. I felt like must was long gone. Must had, hitchhiked and taken off into some other planet. Oh my God, must? I have a must? You've got to be kidding me. I wouldn't even know where to look for it. It was as though should was this erratic, unbelievably forceful force in my life that just took must and ran off with it. And I could feel must in moments. I could feel it, like breadcrumbs, right? I could feel it kind of sparkle over here or shine over there, but I felt so far from that life force that I knew because I was a kid once, right? And as a kid, you can feel that life force. And I had this dream, which I'm going to tell you it was a dreadful dream. I had a dream one night where I was pregnant. And I gave birth in my dream, which is trippy because I've never had kids. And I looked forward onto the mat to see this newborn baby. And it was a pile of dead cats. That's such a horrible dream. I woke up being like, I should never tell anybody that story. Right? That was really bad. And I thought, I'm really up Schitt's Creek. But that is the best way I can describe. It wasn't just my dream life. It was my waking life. My waking life was stillborn. And are you guys familiar with this word, hangry? Yeah. Okay, for those of you who aren't, it's a combination of the word hungry and angry. It's a great word, exceptional word. I love this word. And I realized that this word, hangry, encompasses the all-encompassing desperation that I felt in my life. I was hangry. I was picking up breadcrumbs of must. I was starving. for my life. And that's what must is. And that's how must makes you feel. So the book came out, and I was still really trying to bring all of these things to the surface around should, and around, whatever the cats represented, that was this, right? And I went out on book tour, and I went on a book tour for like 7 months last year, and I was talking to people all over the country, but do you know who kept coming out in droves to my talks? Women. It was like all women. There was a group of like 70-year-old women, like 12 of them. They all came together. And they were like, we're going to get our must on. At the Sacramento Public Library. I was like, yes! And I kept thinking, this is really strange. What is it about shoulds and musts that really resonate with women? And I started thinking, well, I'm a woman. And I've also felt acute sadness or loss or disconnection from my must in my own life. Could any of that have to do with my shoulds? And so I sat down one day and I wrote a list titled, let me tell you this story, and then I'm going to tell you about this list. This is actually around the same time. I'm talking to a friend of mine on the phone, and I said, I was telling him what was going on. He goes, well, I have a story for you. And I said, I would love to hear your story. He said, are you familiar with a man named Gilbert? Do you all know who Gilbert is? I'm in Marin, of course. So Gilbert was a spiritual teacher around the turn of the century, and one day he posed a question to his students. He said, if a prisoner wants to escape from prison, what is the very first thing that the prisoner needs to know? One student raises their hand and says, well, the prisoner needs to get to know the guard. Another student raises their hand and says, a prisoner needs to find the key. No, Gurdjieff says, if a prisoner wants to escape from prison, the first thing the prisoner needs to know is that they are in prison. He's a great friend. He could tell me a story any day of the week, and I'd listen. But that was essentially what these shoulds were. Shoulds are a prison. Shoulds are a prison that we put around us, and until we see them, until we're able to know them and name them and get to know them, they'll stay there like an invisible force against even our very best intentions at pursuing must, right? So I sat down with this idea and I wrote a list. And I titled it, How a Woman Should Live in Today's World. And I wrote this list down, and the very first thing I wrote was, you should never talk about your shoulds. And I thought, well, I'm not going to get very far if I believe that to be true, right? So what's that all about? And I thought, why am I not supposed to talk about my shoulds? And I realized that I also had a should that was right behind it, which was something like, you should be powerful. You should have it all together. You should be strong. You should avoid weakness at all costs. And I thought, there it is. There it is. There's something about shame that's wrapped up in looking at your shoulds, right? Like, am I doing something wrong by looking at my shoulds? Is there something weak about looking at my shoulds? Around this time, I was watching a lot of Brené Brown, and we all know her amazing work on shame. And I realized that anytime I felt weak, anytime I felt vulnerable, instead of doing what I usually did, which was like hit the eject button and run as fast as possible in the opposite direction, I had to turn around and I had to do something really revolutionary in my life, which was I had to walk through that doorway of weakness. I had to use weakness as a signpost for where my journey had to go. And so I sat down and I thought, this is going to be a list of how I'm going to thrive. How I'm going to thrive in my life so that my must feels free to step forward, because I got to get all this stuff out of the way. And so I sat down and I wrote a list, and at the top, how a woman should behave in the world. And so it started off, you should never talk about your shoulds. You should always obey. You should never age. You should know better than to cross the line, speak out, stomp your foot on stage, tell people to be fearless. I mean, there were so many things. It's amazing when you watch a woman in her true power talk. Like, I'm sitting there watching Helen this morning, and I'm like, oh my God, she's so powerful, and she's so strong, and she's just laying it out like it is. And I'm like, but there are so many shoulds that I carry. Like, I should be kind. Well, she was very kind. That I should be just, what's the word? Just kind of like a good girl all the time. And Maria's going to talk about that this afternoon, right? And I'm sitting there looking at Helen thinking, yes, I want to channel my Helen. I want to be more like Helen, right? So I got to keep working through these shoulds. There's this song that we listened to in college, maybe you guys have heard of this Usher song, Yeah? I must have listened to that song 1,000 times. And it came on the other day at a wedding, and I was listening to it, and there's this one line that we all particularly, like grooved down to, which was, you should be a lady in the street, but a freak in the bed. I mean, come on, how many of you rocked that in like stilettos that were like 4 inches too tall? So I was thinking about the ridiculousness of that, and then I got really sad because I realized there's something about it that I believe to be true, right? That I had to be virginal and all together and have it in the public eye, but then privately, this idea that the sexuality was suddenly able to be shown, right? There was this disconnect. And I started going through all of these things out in culture, billboards, messages, old lifeguards, ex-boyfriends. The list got very long. And I read this list to a friend of mine. And you probably have a friend like this. My friend's name is Susie. And she's a very good friend, a really good friend. We'll call her the really good friend. She's the type of friend, you probably have one, you can think of them right now, who will tell you when you have something, in your teeth. And they'll tell you the truth no matter what, because they love you. Susie is my really good friend. And one day I read this list to her, and she said, in the way that only a really good friend could, she goes, wow, it sounds like there's a lot of hate in that list. And I said, you bet, Susie. There's a ton of hate. I was like, this is what's wrong with the world. We need to go and change the world. We need to get rid of should. We need to get rid of all of it. We're going to annihilate should together. And she looked at me and she said something that changed my life forever, forever. And she put herself out there because she loves me this much. She said, it is time to deal with that list inside of you. Oh my gosh, my head exploded. Where was the lifeguard who told me? Where was Usher? Usher's not walking around with me. He's not telling me how to live I've never even met Usher. Those billboards, they're long gone, but their stories are in me. And they're playing on repeat in my mind, telling me how I should never, how I should always be in the world. And I realized through a lot of looking at this list that these stories were keeping me from my life. These stories weren't working for me. And so I needed to get some new stories. And I had a dream recently, which I wanted to share with you because I think this is really important. When you think about your shoulds, so in the dream, I saw all of my shoulds in a paragraph on, it was on nothing, it was in a dream. They were all together like little lines of text. And in the dream, all of the lines began to break and crack. And they began to crumble. And they all fell in to a blender. And I put the lid on the blender, and I blended. And I looked inside, and inside was the elixir. And I woke up, and I'm not sure, do you all know what the elixir is? The elixir is the liquid that goes inside of the Holy Grail. And I had this keen sense. I woke up and I thought, the book is wrong. The book is wrong. And so, Grace, I'm giving you what I think is going to be the updated next new Crossroads. Are you ready? It looks like kind of a strange hot dog, but you're gonna go with me. I think this is what should and must looks like. How do you take your shoulds, get to know them, and transform them into something that's gonna help your must grow? It does look kind of like a weird hot dog, right? Okay, that's for you. But that's it. Don't run from your shoulds. Well, run from them as long as you want to, but they're just gonna chase you. They're gonna move as fast as you run. When you stop and you say, okay, weakness, okay, shame, okay, vulnerability, like let's have this, let's do this. And I'm not gonna approach you with judgment or with anger. I'm gonna approach you with openness. I'm ready for you because I wanna heal. And I wanna grow. And I wanna live the fullness of my life. Because that's why you're here. That's why you're in the Hivery. There's this beautiful quote as you walk in. There's just one you in all of time. And there are all these gifts that only you can give. And you know what they are. You can kind of feel them, right? They like live right down in here. And that's must. And that's must. But the only way must is going to feel free to stand forward with the fierceness and beauty that Helen exhibited this morning when she was talking is because it sounds like she's done a lot of work on her shoulds, right? It sounds like she got on that bus. She moved across the country. She's continued to build her business in a way that's deeply congruent for what's right for her as a person. So as you go through and as you write down your list of shoulds, it can feel a bit like trying to work your way out of something that doesn't really have a beginning or an ending. And I think Helen was also right when she said that it's a process. It's a process. And as we go, we continue to move forward. But it might sometimes feel like this, and that's okay, right? So I want to leave you around should with 3 questions that as you make your list, as you begin to go into that incredible, beautiful space that is the doorway to your must, to your life, ask your shoulds these questions. Where did you come from? You know, maybe it was a billboard. Maybe it was something somebody said, something overheard, right? Something you read, a mistake that somebody made along the way, which doesn't make the mistake any less of a mistake, but maybe you might not think it's true for you anymore. That's a second question. Are you true for me? Are you true for who I am now? I'm no longer a 7-year-old little girl. I'm a 34-year-old woman. Do I want to keep holding on to this? Is this serving me for who I want to become in my life and for what everything around me is asking me to become? As you continue to ask these questions, and it takes time, the most incredible thing will happen. Should will begin to loosen its grip on your life, and it will make space for must. It is the elixir. It is the fertilizer. Your shoulds are the fertilizer for your must. Move through them and let them enrich your life. Now, I know that's doesn't totally make sense, but move through them. Move through them. So before we move into what's next, I just want to give 3 and it doesn't happen, like you don't just deal with all of your shoulds and then suddenly have a gateway to your must. It's more enigmatic than that. I think things happen at different speeds and different parts at different moments, right? So you probably are feeling, or you're either like on the must train, or maybe you're feeling its bits and pieces, or maybe you're feeling torn. I don't know, all of those things, you could probably feel them in a matter of 5 minutes. I want to give some tips that I found, or maybe some questions that people have asked along the way that you might be asking right now. The first thing when people think about must, I cannot tell you how many people have said, but I'm past my prime. I went to this great venture capital dinner in San Francisco last week, and I heard a 31-year-old man stand up and say, I'm totally past my prime. I'm going to leave it to the younger people to do. But that was real for him. I don't know if you all know, but Chef Julia Child, she didn't start writing The Art of French Cooking until she was in her 40s. She published it on her 50th birthday. Laura Ingalls Wilder, author of The Little House on the Prairie, she published her very first book in her 60s. IDEO, down the street in San Francisco, just hired a designer who is 92 years old to help them design aging and end of life. So right now is a good time for you to honor your must. The second thing that comes up again and again around must is this question, which is, what if doing what I love doesn't pay, right? How does all that work? We live on planet Earth, and unfortunately, money is the way that we have to live here, and we have to make a living, so how does all that, function with our passion? There's an incredible TED Talk by Stefan Sagmeister, and he's a designer. He lives in New York. He gave this great talk where he talks about 3 different modes of work. A job is something done from 9 to 5, something typically done for pay. A career is a series of advancements over time, and a calling is something done for intrinsic motivation. I picked this image. It says Leroy Chiao, astronaut, because I don't know. I think he's really found his calling. It had no phone number, no email, not just an astronaut. So what he talks about with these 3 things is that you can combine them any way that you want. And when I heard this described, it really blew my mind, because I never thought about 3 different modes of work. So in the book, I talk about how to do this in more detail, but the high-level version is just make on a piece of paper 3 columns and plot everything that you do across these. Is there stuff that falls more in the job category, stuff that falls in the calling category? How do things map? And I looked throughout time. This is covered more in depth in the book. But how did people combine these in other ways? So T.S. Eliot, who we all know had a calling to be a writer, which is why we're familiar with his work, he also had a career in finance. He had a brilliant financial mind. He was a banker in London. And I imagine that being a banker in London created the space for him to be a writer. That's great. So somebody else who I recently heard speak was Elizabeth Gilbert. She similarly talks about her calling as being a writer, and she took a series of odd jobs. She made a pact with her art very early on, and she said, I will never ask you to pay the rent. And she took a series of all different types of jobs. So I would say she had less of a career as T.S. Eliot did, and maybe more a series of jobs. She sang for her supper, and eventually, of course, her calling took off, and she's no longer a bartender. But you can combine these things in any way that you want. I think the big takeaway here is that just because you do something for money doesn't make that work dirty. And just because you want to find your calling doesn't mean that you need to quit your job, right? You might pursue your calling Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, or have a job Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and pursue your calling on nights and weekends. Or you might be able to do your calling full time and make a living from it. But there's not one right answer. You get to combine these things any way you want. I heard an incredible interview with Philip Glass, and he talks about his work and his life, and he said, while working, Philip Glass, the composer, he said, while working, I suddenly heard a noise and looked around to find Robert Hughes, the art critic of Time magazine, staring at me in disbelief. But you're Philip Glass! What are you doing here? It was obvious that I was installing his dishwasher, and I told him that I would soon be finished. But you're an artist, he protested. I explained that I was an artist, but that I was sometimes a plumber as well, and he should go away and let me finish. Love that. So the third thing to keep in mind as you're pursuing your must is really important, especially for the time in which we live. And it's space. Space. For me, my space is my white room. And I want to highlight two types of space. There's a physical space and there's a psychological space. And you need both. You need both. So a physical space might be a desk at the public library. It might be a spot here at the Hivery. It might be a table at Equator. It could be, closet in your house, whatever it might be. You need a physical space to exist, right? This is what Virginia Woolf famously called a room of one's own. But you also need psychological space. Do you like that? I just dropped boxes, and there we are. Psychological boxes. You need time. You need a time when you aren't interruptible. Like where you've got screaming children or whatever. Nope, they need to stay out. This is mom's time. You need this time that is just for you to be alone with yourself, with your own true, deepest voice, with what you want for your business, for your family, for your life, for whatever it is that has gripped your heart undeniably, right? The problem is, the reason we don't do it, and the reason, I was out on book tour, and the problem that I found over and over again is that we're busy. And we were at a strange moment in time when we are addicted to being busy, and we're like offloading large parts of our cognitive powers to our machines, right? I'm like waking up like this these days. It's really trippy. It's really trippy. And how do we become less busy? How do we reclaim this space, right, where we can exist? If you create a space in your life for must, so think about it right now, where is it? Where is that space? See it, hold it. If you visit that place every day, I guarantee it that must will begin to take root in your life and it will begin to sprout. I had this guy come up to me after a talk. He was furious. He was so mad at me. It was like everything I said was really bad. He came fuming up and he, barged to the front of the line. He goes, I've got 5 kids and a mortgage. How am I supposed to choose must? And I thought, oh God, a lot of us have 5 kids and a mortgage in one way or another, right? And I said, well, do you have 10 minutes? He said, I have 10 minutes. Start there, 10 minutes a day. We started a thing 3 years ago called the 100-Day Project. Some of you might have done it. That's what that was for. Just do something every day for 100 days. Maybe it takes you 60 seconds, 10 minutes, half hour if you're lucky. It'll change your life. It'll change your life. So find a space, because the more you cultivate must in your own life, the more you bring it forth, you never know who is out there, who is hearing exactly what you are giving, who is waiting to receive your gifts. And I guarantee you it's out there. I guarantee it. Mark Twain once said that the two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. And I believe that each of us will find the answer to that second day right here, at the intersection between these two roads. And today, you get to choose. You get to choose. If you want to choose must, you can. And here's how. Just do one thing. Might only take 5 minutes. Better if it only takes 5 minutes, because if I gave you 3 hours, it would expand. 5 minutes. Just do one thing. Take one step towards what you must do with your brief time. I want to conclude with a story, and then we're going to move into an exercise. I took myself on a date, a very pivotal date. I highly recommend taking yourself on a date all the time. It's by yourself. It's from the book The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Yeah, she's amazing. She's brilliant. So I took myself on a solo date. I realized that in my kind of digital world, I was craving something analog. I just wanted to see, it was like an old car where the stick shift changed the metal inside of the car and things. I just wanted to feel like inputs affecting outputs very tangibly. And so I decided to go to the symphony and hear the piano. And I got all dressed up in my favorite tunic dress. And I rode my bicycle at sunset because this is my date and we were going to do everything I wanted to do. And you should do this. Should. I just said should. It's always been very fruitful for me. See how that works? It's always been fruitful for me to try to do one date a week. Julia Cameron also said, when I treat myself as a precious object, then I will become strong. She totally gets it. She totally gets it. So, okay, I'm in my tunic dress. The sun is setting. It's so beautiful. And I'm biking across San Francisco towards the symphony. And, I'm parking my bike right out front, front row parking spot. And I go inside and I'm like, one ticket for as close to the stage, please. There was a seat in the third row. I was like, this date rocks. And that night there was a man named Andreas Schiff, and he was playing Bach's French Suites. And he's a Hungarian pianist, and I didn't even know what Bach's French Suites were, but I was like, I'm so tired, and I'm glad to be here in my tunic dress. And I sat down, and I realized that the guy next to me had also come alone. And I thought, okay, cool. So throughout the performance, you might have at some point in your life sat next to somebody who was like my seatmate. He was clapping louder than everybody else. He was just feeling it. He was feeling the music. And it was almost as though he was vibrating on another frequency. And I could feel it just sitting next to him. It was palpable. And the performance was incredible. It went on for 3 hours. And at the end, I leaned over, everybody's applauding. And I leaned over to my seatmate and I said, so what did you think? I knew what he thought, but I just wanted to hear him say it. I said, what did you think about the performance? And he said, wow, this. He said, I have followed along with this man's performances for years. I've downloaded all of his music. I've listened to all of his songs. But this, to be right here in the third row, to be so close to the piano that I can feel the vibrations of the strings inside of my chest, to watch him play for 3 straight hours from memory with his eyes closed. This is to experience something in life that has soul in it. Wow, I said, you must be a pianist. And he looked at me and he said, me? No way. But I often have this dream where I am.